Hello and good morning everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar with Valimail today. So the webinar is focusing on email's identity crisis and why identifying the sender is critical to stopping phishing attacks. So presenting the webinar today, we have Brian from Valimail, and we also have Matt Compton here from Bytes, who's going to talk a little bit about the relationship between Bytes and Valimail.
Thanks, Amy. So yeah, I'm Matt Compton. I work in the data security team at Bytes. And I just want to give you a quick intro into today's webinar. At Bytes, we are a huge Microsoft house. We've sold over 4 million 365 seats and deployed over 2 million. And also we have a huge security practice, and we still recognize that the #1 vector for attacks is still via email. And we feel that we need to advise and educate our customer base in terms of what are the new and latest risks and threats that are coming in. And one of those areas to look at specifically around DMARC. So Bytes have taken a partnership up with Valimail, as you see that they're a very, very credible vendor in the market. And today's webinar is all about extending the email security that you have in place from the likes of a Mimecast or a Semantic or a Proofpoint, and making sure that you have that additional layer of security through the DMARC tools that are available. So as I said, I just wanted to give a bit of an intro, but yeah, we see this as a fast growth area in our base, and lots of organizations are taking up DMARC tools to add on to their security platforms today. So on that, I will hand over to Brian, and I may be back at the end of the webinar for the Q&A section. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Matt. This is Brian Westnedge from Valimail, and Amy, just a quick check. Can you see my full screen?
You just need to swap it
Alrighty. Always.
Brilliant, perfect.
There we go. I think that's a little better. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for joining today. Really looking forward to talking to you about how Valimail approaches the anti-phishing space a little differently than most folks, and very appreciative of our partnership with Bytes, as well as for you for taking the time to listen today. So got a quick overview of the problem we're trying to solve, how we do it, and then I'll show you a very short demo of our automated DMARC implementation and enforcement tool, which I think will be of very great interest to you, and we'll highlight how you can use DMARC to get visibility into phishing issues, and then how to solve for exact domain impersonation in particular. So let's get going. If you hadn't heard of Valimail before, Bytes, we are a 4-year-old startup based in San Francisco, and frankly, our measure of success is what clients say about us. You may not have heard of us before this, but you probably recognize some of the larger global brands on this slide. But essentially our mission is to protect companies like yours from phishing attacks. We're generally considered innovation leaders in the way we automate and operationalize the implementation of our technology, which I'll show you. So it just works for you, and we want to provide a straightforward and very clear value proposition for us. The customers that use us stick with us and love the service. So that is the biggest testament to success for us, is our customer retention rate. From a standards bodies perspective and from a partnership perspective, Matt mentioned certainly Microsoft is a key partner of Bytes, same with Valimail. Microsoft recommends our solution to customers as they're making their Office 365 migration, or if they're already there. We also partner with some of the large secure email gateways in the space. From a standards bodies perspective, it's very important for us to participate in the groups that are advancing the standards that make the world better for everybody. In our space, and in kind of the email security and authentication space, the standards bodies are, there's an ITF working group for DMARC that we're co-chairs of. There's something called BIMI, which is a very nice extension to DMARC from a brand protection. Won't go into that today, but can certainly follow up with you with more information about that. But essentially, it is really important for us to participate in the ecosystem to make the world better for everybody in this space. And it's something, if you talk to folks that are involved in any way in email authentication in DMARC, they certainly will have heard of Valimail as heavy participants in the standards body. So let's move on to the most interesting part of the talk today, which is how we can protect email, which is certainly central to your business today. We all see email from various entities in our day-to-day. Email is critical to our business operations. If there's a hiccup in email, you feel it throughout the organization. We're all getting, some of us getting bombarded with email from all different sources. So the interesting thing about email is that it has become more complex in a cloud era. The traditional kind of world was that everything was kind of guarded behind your four walls, and all email was sent from one place, and you defend against what is in the email. But in today's world, it's obviously everything is cloud-based and distributed outside of your four walls. It could be Office 365 or any number of different services that we all use on a daily basis. You have, dozens of third parties sending mail on your behalf. And really the attacks today are now exploiting who is sending the mail rather than what's in it, which we call impersonation attacks, and that's what we're really uniquely suited to address. Not a surprise to anybody. Matt mentioned, email is definitely the #1 threat vector these days. Attacks are exploiting people rather than infrastructure, most primarily, and the way people are attacked is through phishing. So, all the different organizations that Bytes partners with is kind of, mention this upward trend of, if you haven't been phished, more than likely it is going to happen. The business email compromise losses in particular, those are the really insidious, highly targeted, socially engineered attacks, not spray and pray attacks, not the old, kind of botnets of old where you're sending massive, spam campaigns. It's much more bespoke and targeted these days, and really hard for most organizations to protect against falling for these attacks, especially if there's no content or links in the messages to detonate or analyze. So kind of mentioned this already, but our real focus at Valimail, if you think about the two attack vectors within email, who sent and what's in it, we are solely focused on who sent the message and can you trust them? Are they who they say they are? You have a secure email gateway or Office 365 with ATP, that is going to be taking care of the content scanning and does it have malicious links and stuff. We are not an email gateway. We're not a replacement for an email gateway. We are an additional layer of security on top of your email gateway based on identity. And frankly, one of the great things about DMARC is it works with any email gateway. So as you're making your migration to Office 365 in the cloud, you can use DMARC to assist in that journey to give you visibility into all of your mail programs as you make that cloud journey with both Office 365 and other solutions. So if you think about the world today, I mentioned this already, it's bespoke, it's custom attacks. Everybody's attacked in a different way. I might get a password reset type email. Amy might get a CEO fraud email asking her to transfer, make a wire transfer outside the organization. Matt may get, an Apple, iTunes scam. But, it's definitely a world in which attacks are customized to the recipient. If you think about, the attacks that we see, a lot of them these days, the majority of them these days, do not contain malware. So, we're not on guard necessarily. If there's no link or attachment in the message, we may not be thinking that it's malicious. We all get a lot of email every day, and we're all, going through our email quickly and trying to clean out our inbox and get to inbox zero. And for most of us, it just may not be easy to tell the difference between, a legitimate email and a malicious email that just doesn't have malicious content in it. So if you think about these type of attacks, what we found and what kind of the market also backs up, the last stat that Barracuda put out was that 83% of all phishing attacks are impersonations, which makes sense because you think about if you get a phishing attack, obviously, the sender is trying to get you to take a negative action, and of course they're going to try to impersonate either a person or a brand that you are familiar with that will, give the mail legitimacy. So it makes sense that the majority of phishing attacks are impersonations. So if you can stop impersonations, then you can stop nearly all phish. So, kind of, stands to reason, of course, but this is why we exist, is to stop impersonation attacks, which will in turn, stop most phishing for your organization. So what do I mean by impersonation attacks in particular? So there's the exact domain attack. This is the malicious actors spoofing your own company's domain to add legitimacy to their campaign. So trying to get you to take some sort of negative action. Somebody may spoof you internally to your employees and your colleagues, but they may also spoof you externally to your customers and your partners in your supply chain. So DMARC exists to address the exact domain attack. Early email authentication technologies like SPF and DKIM have been adopted by a lot of organizations, but they still didn't stop spoofing and phishing attacks. So DMARC came along to specifically address the exact domain impersonation attack to give you visibility into the issue and then give you some tools to solve for it. Of course, while most statistics say, and your own experience may back this up, is that most phishing attacks do leverage a trusted brand. First and foremost, obviously, you probably see a lot of attacks from cousin or lookalike domains, so untrusted domains coming inbound to employees. And then you also might see somebody that just spoofs a trusted person or entity in the display name or the friendly from of the message, and then they use a open sign-up account like Gmail or Yahoo or Outlook.com or what have you. There's thousands out there, and they're going to bet on the fact that you're only really looking at that display name and not really paying even attention to the actual domain that the mail claims to be from. So these three different attack vectors are what Valimail is geared up to protect you against. And what we like to say is that we use a trust layer to enforce trust in your brand. So, who sent the message? If you can't trust it, why even pass the message through any type of content scanning if you can't even trust the sender? And this is where DMARC comes in handy. Again, DMARC makes no judgment on the content of the message. DMARC simply says, does this message pass authentication for the domain it claims to be from? And if it doesn't pass authentication, then block the mail. So it's a very straightforward approach. It's very binary. One of the reasons I love DMARC and I've been working in this space for about the last 7 years is because it's highly deterministic. So it's nothing about the content of the message. It's simply, if the message claims to be from my domain, does it pass authentication for my domain? If it doesn't, then you can block it. And again, you have the attacks coming inbound to your organization that you want to block, but you also want to block, somebody spoofing you to the rest of the world. You never want a customer receiving a fake invoice from somebody claiming to be you, asking them to pay their invoice at a different payment address, for instance. You don't want your partners in your supply chain to ever receive fake messages from you. So the great thing about DMARC is it's supported by nearly every major email gateway in the world, all of the secure email gateways, commercial secure email gateways, as well as Office 365 and G Suite out of the box. and it allows you to take responsibility for your mail and to enforce your domain identities. And so, like I said, we're not a replacement for an email gateway. We are an additional layer of security based on trust. So enforce trust in your brand globally, and then you can also protect from kind of the inbound attacks from the cousin or lookalike domains, from the open sign-up accounts. This is just a sample of some kind of cousin and lookalike domains of pretty common brands that we caught sitting behind, a secure email gateway. You can see kind of the very hard to discern sometimes Spotify music instead of Spotify music, various permutations of Microsoft and Apple stores. This type of stuff, because the content is not malicious in any way, but it's sent from just purely an untrusted sender, may slip through your traditional email gateways. This is where we can help. This is where we can run a proof of value and show you what we can also catch that potentially your email gateway and Office 365 don't catch out of the box. Importantly, on the DMARC side of things, so automation is a core tenet of our design philosophy here, and a core tenet of how we leverage technology to solve kind of the impersonation problem for customers. So from a DMARC perspective, DMARC is a public lookup in DNS, just like an SPF record. So what we can see, because we've been scanning DNS since our company's inception, is if you try to do DMARC on your own, you can put a DMARC record in place and get DMARC reports, but the reports you get are not really human readable. The do-it-yourself implementations that we see only have about a 20% success rate of getting to DMARC enforcement, which is where you're enforcing a DMARC policy of quarantine and reject, where you're telling the rest of the world, hey, if you see a message from me and it does not pass authentication, then either quarantine or reject it. So we can see this in DNS that, do-it-yourself projects with DMARC, the majority of the time, 80% of the time, they fail. If you use some sort of service to process DMARC reports for you, certainly you're going to have a better chance of success, but still the majority of those implementations still fail. You may have to devote, a lot of time and resource internally to the project, which is going to cost, time and money. You get stuck in a loop of, and I'll get into the details of this in a second, you may get stuck in a loop of just kind of never-ending manual maintenance and DNS changes. But, frankly, the reason folks like Bytes and Microsoft work with Valimail is because of our success rate at getting customers to DMARC enforcement. So 90% of our customers get to DMARC enforcement within 4 months. All of our customers get there within a year. We estimate it will require about 20% of one person's time for a short period of time, obviously less than 4 months, to get to DMARC enforcement. And really, you never have to touch DNS again after making a one-time change that I'll show you. And everything is as automated as it can be in this space. But this is frankly why customers stick with us, is because we get them to DMARC enforcement quickly and safely, but we also keep them there as they add and remove new third-party cloud services. So, we're very happy to teach you as much as you need to know about email authentication, but really we're providing a managed service, and we have customers that never even log into our user interface. They simply tell their professional services consultant, to just make changes for me. And really, this can be a very hands-off project for your organization. You just tell us which centers you want to authorize, and we can go ahead and authenticate them for you very easily. So I'll show you what that looks like in practice in a second. But overall, what you'll find in working with us, other than being automated, the other thing that we're highly focused on is data privacy. And all of our solutions, will never process, read, or store any email content or any PII. which will leave you in the best possible standing for GDPR compliance and any other local data privacy law. In our space, we're SOC 2 Type 2 certified. We're the only solution, and the U.S. government has a standard called FedRAMP, which is a privacy certification for companies that want to do business with the U.S. government. The U.S. government actually mandates DMARC adoption for U.S. federal agencies. We're the only solution that's FedRAMP certified. And as I mentioned, we want to be deterministic, so there's no blind spots, there's no guesswork, there's no trust scores per se. It's extremely binary. But really, this is what you get when you're working with us. And then now I'd like to show you a little bit about, the why you want to work with us because of our unique approach and ease of use. So what does that mean? Well, the reason our company exists is because customers initially tried to, get to DMARC enforcement on their own or using some sort of reporting services, but it's really hard to get to DMARC enforcement. We put out studies ourselves that show that, the vast majority of domains in the world today don't have a DMARC record at all. And the ones that do have a DMARC record in place, very few of those are actually a DMARC enforcement. So the majority of domains that even have a DMARC record are not enforced. And why is that? Well, it's really hard to manually identify and configure all these different cloud services. The standards, the email authentication standards like SPF and DKIM are really brittle. You can fat finger SPF records. You can forget to publish DKIM keys. Continuously monitoring all these third-party cloud services that you're using takes work and time. And for a lot of organizations, just making DNS changes for purposes of email authentication is painful and slow and requires going through change control, which can take a while. So, if you do make a mistake, no one's going to notice if your legitimate mail continues to flow while you're going through the DMARC journey. But if you accidentally block legitimate mail that doesn't authenticate correctly, that looks like it might be malicious, then you're going to lose, faith and support from your colleagues if that ever happens. So we ensure that never happens. Talking about, kind of the limitations in the email authentication standards in DNS. So there's something in SPF some of you may have encountered before, which is called the 10 lookup limit, which just means that a SPF record can only require 10 or less DNS lookups before it breaks and it stops being evaluated. If you include references to third parties like G Suite, that takes up 4 DNS lookups. Zendesk takes 6 DNS lookups. So if you're adding on Salesforce and a marketing automation tool and a marketing tool to all that, you may very quickly run up against that SPF 10 domain lookup limit, which we have a very nice workaround for that I'll show you. Again, if you're making DNS updates manually, it's easy to either fat finger things or include references to other hosts or domains that may not exist. It's very fragile if you try to do what's called IP address flattening, which is you take a IP address range, let's say for Office 365, and you list it manually in your SPF record because you're trying to avoid that 10 lookup limit. It is a very painful process and extremely error prone. We have a very nice piece of technology called Instant SPF, where we return a dynamic SPF response for each SPF query we get in each application that's sending mail for you. So you never exceed the 10 lookup limit, and you can authorize as many senders to send email for you in your SPF record as you'd like. We have several customers that have authorized tens of senders in their SPF record with no issues. So I'll show you actually what that looks like in practice in the portal in a second. The other challenge is, even if you can identify some of the services that are sending mail for you, a lot of email services these days are built on top of cloud platforms like SendGrid, like Mailgun, like SparkPost. So if I'm starting an online service, I may not want to manage email for that service. So I use an API from one of these providers to actually send the mail for my service. So, you know, it's critical that you can identify, you know, SendGrid is a standalone service for your organization versus a service that runs on top of SendGrid. And we do a very good job about identifying that in our user interface because we catalog so many of these services, which I'll get into in a second. You know, the manual identification of these services, this is where you can run into an issue with good email getting blocked. So DMARC reports, raw DMARC reports come in XML files that kind of look like the far left-hand side, that they're not human readable. You have to parse through them. Even if you parse through them to extract IP addresses, then you have to try to figure out, okay, what service are they associated with? It may look like SendGrid, but what if it's, you know, a service running on top of SendGrid? And then you have to figure out, okay, is this service legitimate or not? Who's the service owner internally? So this whole manual process takes a lot of time. You know, it's prone to error, and it's something that we can just take completely out of the picture with our automation. So we automate the whole service identification layer. You know, it's very easy to take a look at your high volume mailers like Office 365, like your commercial email gateway, you know, and see, okay, very clearly we have a large portion of mail coming from, you know, a few large services. But what about the long tail of other services that send mail for you? You know, we actually identify over 5,500 different email services. We catalog those in the background for you. We know what the proper include statement for their SPF is. We know how they use DKIM and how they generate DKIM keys and how their platform uses DKIM. So by cataloging all these services for you, it'll make it a heck of a lot easier to get to DMARC enforcement. You'll never have to worry, have I found the needle in the haystack? What about that one service that my CFO uses to send her particular, you know, finance-related newsletter, what have you? So we will identify the needle in the haystack. You'll never have to worry, have I actually identified all legitimate mail? You'll never get the call, you know, before a holiday from somebody who is upset that you blocked their mail stream, because we take this service-based approach and that we identify the long tail of all the different services. And we're obviously updating our catalog every day, because new services are spun up every day that you might not be aware of, that are actually mailing on behalf of your organization, might be shadow IT, et cetera. We'll be able to show that and give you that visibility immediately. So if you think about the DMARC journey in particular, we think of it as being a process rather than a project with kind of a defined end date. Certainly, if you try to, you know, protect your sender identity, do email authentication on your own, you kind of get stuck in this endless loop of manual changes, you know, going through change control for SPF and DKIM updates, you know, identifying new services. Really, why you'd want to use Valimail is because you make a one-time update to point your SPF, DKIM, and DMARC records to us. From there, you will identify all the different services sending mail on your behalf. You tell us which ones you want to authenticate. And that's really all there is to the process. And this is how we can get customers to enforcement so quickly. You can manage all authentication from the portal. You can authenticate senders with one click. You can publish DKIM keys with one click. I'll show you how that works in a second. You can change your DMARC policy on your domain with one click. You can go from none to reject instantaneously without having to do a manual DNS change internally. So we want to simplify the whole process. We want to be the easy button to protect your domains from impersonation, and as well as protect you, you know, on the non-DMARC side of things from the inbound phishing attacks that leverage present and lookalike domains. So ultimately, you know, our approach is we want to identify the finite set of good email the organization sends. So, you know, there's an infinite set of malicious mail that can spoof you. but there's really a limited finite set of good email that your organization sends. So we're solely focused in, you know, looking for the good mail, identifying it and authenticating it. You know, we're really the bouncer at the club. If you're not on the whitelist, you don't get in, rather than kind of looking through all the bad stuff and then blocking it. So if you identify the good, then you can block the bad and not worry about looking through it, and you know, not worrying about message content, not worrying about, you know, trust scores and such. So it's very deterministic and definitive. You know, again, we're not using the buzzwords like AI and ML. You know, we don't want to be a black box of any kind. And that kind of approach is frankly what you know, resonates with our customers and you know, keeps them with us over time. And you know, because it is you know, quite different from most approaches to the space, which is, you know, I want to see as much bad email as possible. I want to get as much threat intel as I can, and then I'll make determinations on what to do with malicious messages. You know, we just turn that completely on its head. If a message, you know, you have to be proven good to enter our environment, or else you stay outside. All right, with that, I am going to switch to a quick demo of our platform in a browser, so bear with me. And I think I'm showing now my browser. Amy, just let me know otherwise. But what you're going to see with DMARC, and then how we interpret and analyze it for you, is if you point your DMARC record to us during an assessment, which we'd love for you to do, we'll send you the information on how you can do this with Bytes right after the call. Is once you point your DMARC record to us, we're going to get some great information and visibility that aren't available today with simply, you know, SPF and DKIM on their own. So DMARC adds a reporting layer, first and foremost, which gives us this visibility that SPF and DKIM don't have on their own. So what you're going to see is anywhere in the world, somebody is sending a message for you, or claiming to, somebody is sending a message claiming to be from your domain anywhere in the world. You can flip a switch then and see what are the areas of the world that are sending malicious messages as you. So it's important that, you know, you may get reports from customers from time to time, from employees of phishing attacks, from partners, but there are a lot of attacks that can emanate from outside of your four walls. You know, let's say somebody in Russia is sending mail as you to somebody in Brazil, and you never even see that traffic because it doesn't pass through your four walls. Well, DMARC will give you that visibility into who's using your domain for email anywhere in the world, both legitimately, you know, one of your cloud solutions, or potentially maliciously. So, you know, the maps are great. That's a nice visual you can share with the rest of your organization. Say, you know, this is where we are today with our, you know, this is kind of our starting point of, are we being spoofed and abused in the world today? Then you can drill down into a particular domain. Let me just choose, I'll just choose a finance domain that we're operating here. So what you're going to see once you start sending DMARC reports to the Valimail platform is you're going to see a few different things, and I'll just extend the time frame here, get a little more data going. What you're going to see is on a daily basis how much of the mail sent from your domains passes DMARC, how much of it fails DMARC by day, which is interesting. But the most interesting part of what we can show you is the service identification view. So what we're going to take is that raw DMARC data, and we're going to turn it into Action 1 information. So here are all the different services sending mail as this particular domain. There are, you know, pretty recognizable ones, you know, sending large volumes. And then there's kind of the long tail that I spoke about in the catalog. You know, there's services sending one message, you know, over the last 30 days out of, you know, 300 million messages. So this type of traffic would be very hard to identify if you're trying to do DMARC on your own. I have no idea what bullying leads is. Sounds like a very interesting service, but you can see that anybody can tell you, hey, you're sending a lot of mail from Amazon SES, or you may be able to figure out internally that we're using G Suite or Office 365, but we're going to do a very good job of showing you, the long tail of services. You're going to see immediately on the screen, what would be the impact today if I move to a DMARC reject policy? Well, everything in green is going to authenticate correctly as your organization and pass DMARC. Everything in red does not authenticate correctly today as your organization and will fail DMARC and will be blocked if you move to a DMARC reject policy. So you're going to know immediately where you stand if your goal is to get to DMARC enforcement. The stuff in green, that's passing authentication, that's great. The stuff in red over here, so these are all legitimate services. Workfront is an HR platform. WordPress Engine, a lot of folks use that, for their blog content and such. So they're all legitimate services, but they may not be authorized for your organization to send mail for you. So they could be shadow IT projects that, you're not always consulted when one of your colleagues or an intern goes out and signs up with Constant Contact and starts sending an email newsletter. So what DMARC is going to give you is immediate visibility into all services. You decide which ones you want to authenticate, and then you can authenticate them from the platform, which I'll show you in a second. But the thing about the failing services is you're going to have complete governance over who is allowed to use your domain for email ultimately, which you haven't had before. Email has been really siloed. You have your infrastructure team that looks after your Office 365 mail. You have marketing that uses a marketing platform. They're not necessarily talking together or have visibility into each other's platforms. And what this is going to do is give you complete visibility, complete control, and complete governance over all email streams within the organization, which is really powerful. And again, we'll identify these services running on top of services, as well as just kind of the services you might recognize directly, like Mailgun. So the first piece of automation is identifying all these senders for you and kind of plain English. This is without you having to look at IP addresses and host names. So that's really interesting. And then from a configuration perspective, let me go to a domain that I can make changes on. If you point your SPF, DKIM, and DMARC records to us once, from then on you manage all of the authentication from the platform. So for this particular domain today, defendmy.email, the DMARC policy is none. Okay, if I do a quick lookup of this domain, let me just do it, defendmy.email. I'm looking at the DMARC record for this domain in DNS. Okay, the policy of the domain is none, and I'm sending my DMARC reports to Valimail. Great. Well, let's say I'm in a position where I want to change my DMARC policy to reject. I'm ready to block and stop all the impersonation attacks. So if I hit reject here, I hit update, I can see that the DMARC policy now has changed in our platform. And if I go to DNS now and do a DNS lookup, I can see that the policy has immediately changed to reject for this domain. So just, this is one example of the automation is you can immediately change your DMARC policy from a user interface without having to go through change control to make that DNS update. So really powerful in that regard. The second piece of how we would host your authentication records for you is in the SPF section. So for this particular domain, there's 19 enabled senders on this domain. The SPF record is not broken. I mentioned that we return back a dynamic SPF response for each SPF query we get. So all of these third parties are ones you recognize. If you want to add a new service, Microsoft Office 365 is already on there, but let me just choose SendGrid as my marketing tool. But let's say you know that you're onboarding a new service like SendGrid, you can come to our catalog here. This is where we catalog 5,000 different services from A to Z. you can just choose, okay, I want to enable SendGrid in my SPF record. You choose SendGrid, you hit enable, and immediately SendGrid is authorized in your SPF record. You don't have to look up or ask SendGrid what IP address ranges they mail from, or what's the include statement I need to put in my SPF record for SendGrid. We've cataloged all that information on the back end. We know exactly how it works, and we know, you know, what SPF responds to return dynamically. So that's great. Let's say I want to onboard Marketo, and I'll just do this really quickly for those of you that have struggled with SPF. So if I'm enabling Marketo as my marketing automation tool, I can do enable them in the UI. On the back end now, if I go to and do an SPF query for Marketo for this particular domain, so I've got a canned query here, but really what's happening is I'm getting asked for an SPF query. This is the IP address sending the message. It's coming from Marketo. It's coming, sending as my domain. And if Marketo is included as an authorized sender for my domain, like I just enabled them, here's the SPF response that's custom for this piece of mail. There's an include statement just to Marketo. And because we're only including the reference to Marketo, this is how we can authorize, you know, all of these different senders in the record. This is why the SPF record will never break, because we return back a dynamic response for each SPF query we get. Let's just say Marketo, okay, they didn't really work out so well, so I'm going to deauthorize them for sending from my domain. So if I do that real quick in the UI, again, I don't have to do any sort of DNS change. If I come back now and do that same query for Marketo, we're going to return back a completely different SPF response. Marketo is not authorized. We return back a blank SPF minus all records. So this unique bit of SPF automation is something that allows us to move very quickly with customers in getting them to demark enforcement. Again, you just tell us, of all the senders we identified for you, which ones do you want to authorize, and then we'll go do it here, or you can do it yourself, you know, whatever the case may be. You can authorize, if you do have internal platforms that send mail for you, you can authorize individual net blocks or IP address ranges as well. So that's the SPF side of things. The DKIM side of things is similarly straightforward to manage as well. So let's say because we're cataloging all these different services for you, and we see who you've enabled for SPF, we're also going to give you some information on the DKIM side of things. So if you've enabled Semantic Email Security Cloud in your SPF record, we know that they support DKIM, but you haven't configured a DKIM key for them. Okay, great. How do you actually do that? Well, I just go to add a DKIM key. I can add the DKIM selector. We'll just say Message Labs. You know, I can add some metadata, you know, as added by Brian today. And then I can paste in the Message Labs public key. I can, if they use a CNAME, I can CNAME it. But because we're hosting your DKIM record for you as well, you can just hit add, and immediately that key will be listed in the key inventory here. So what this is going to allow you to do is you're going to be able to create, rotate, and manage your keys without doing DNS updates. We'll import all your existing keys for you. You'll have a complete inventory, so you'll know, okay, well, you know, this is just demo data, but if I put the key in today, we would know the exact age of the key. You can rotate your keys every, you know, 12 to 24 months. If you want to delete keys, if you're no longer using, you know, MailChimp to send your marketing mail, you just come here and delete the key as well. And that will, you know, remove the key immediately from DNS. That mail will no longer pass DKIM. So in total, hosting DMARC records, SPF records, and DKIM records for you allows you to manage everything from the user interface. No more change control, no more manual DNS updates, no more accidentally fat fingering an SPF record. You know, you're using essentially us as a service for email authentication. You know, we provide the dynamic authentication responses for you, you know, 24/7 by 365. So this really takes a a highly manual process off your plate, something that's confusing and complicated and vexing for many of our customers before they start using us. So, that's really it from a user interface perspective. We have a lot of reporting, that you can do and share with the organization. Won't get into that. I want to leave a little time for Q&A, but again, it's very easy to do a trial for this. We'll give you the information after the call, but essentially you put your DMARC record in place, point it to us for a couple of weeks, and we'll come back to you with a very nice report and analysis you can share with the organization. So let me quickly go back to PowerPoint. I will wrap up with a few slides, and then we'll take some Q&A. So I guess from the demo side, so the phishing analysis, what is that going to look like? So if you point your record to us, of course, we're going to show you how much of your mail doesn't authenticate today, how much spoofing traffic do we see on your mail, what are the different services sending mail as you, and how many of them are there, which ones are shadow IT, which ones do we actually want to authorize, so you'll get this global view. So that's the DMARC side of things. If you want to do a trial of our Office 365 plugin that will also show you kind of untrusted domains mailing into your organization, it's a very easy connection to the Office 365 connector, and we would process data for a couple weeks and come back to you and say, these are all the untrusted domains we see sending as used. So you can see all the cousin and lookalike domain attacks and open sign-up attacks. Both are very easy, require, when folks hear, the words POCs or assessments, they immediately think, it's going to take a lot of time and resource from my organization. Luckily, that's not the case. It's not like doing a assessment for, an email gateway or any other email security service or cybersecurity service. Very straightforward, should not require a lot of time and energy from your organization. And you can come back in a couple weeks again with a very nice report we'll share with the organization. So we'll also show you all the malicious sites sending mail as you, and really how your brand is being represented in the world in a way that may not be what you want. So just to wrap up, a few things to remember, and Amy will send these links out with the recording of the webinar, but to sign up for our phishing analysis, we have a page. Just go in, just need your name and your company domain. If you're curious if your company is doing anything with DMARC today, you can go to our domain checker on our website. If you go to valimail.com, you can find it there as well. But you can see what is my organization's current DMARC posture. Do we have a DMARC record at all? If we do have a DMARC record, are we at enforcement? It'll just give you the basic information you need as you start the DMARC journey. But really what I'd like to wrap up with is, we want to provide you a managed service that will do the heavy lifting for you in three different areas. Obviously get you to DMARC enforcement quickly, but also safely, give you the ability to authenticate senders in your SPF record with one click and an unlimited number of senders. Don't have to worry about the SPF 10 lookup limit again. And then just give you a platform that's going to generate, manage, and rotate your DKIM keys without you, again, having to do anything manual. And then obviously stop the cousin lookalike and open sign-up attacks too. So really the sole reason we exist is to stop these impersonation attacks for you. And we look forward to working with you and your Bytes consultant. So really, Amy and Matt, I think that's all I have for the moment. And if we have any Q&A, happy to address that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Brian. So if you do have any questions at all, there is a questions panel just on the right-hand side of your screen. If you type them in there, I'll read those out for Brian. Okay, so we have actually had one already. Someone said, does it work with on-prem Exchange?
Yes, DMARC. So the cousin and lookalike domain solution we have, it's called Valimail Defend. It requires Office 365 and the Office 365 connector, but our DMARC solution called Valimail Enforce works with on-prem Exchange as well as any other email gateway.
Brilliant, thank you. Another question, can you clarify the difference between the products?
Yeah, absolutely. So Valimail Enforce is our automated DMARC implementation enforcement product. Didn't get into too much product naming within this demonstration, but that's what it's called, Valimail Enforce. And Valimail Defend is our untrusted domain solution, if you will. So looking at the cousin and lookalike domain attacks and the open sign-up attacks that may be impersonating you in your brand, as well as other domains in the marketplace as well. So very happy that you don't have to use them together. They operate independently of each other, so you can use the DMARC solution and not the defense solution, and vice versa.
Thank you, Brian. Another question here, do I need DMARC even though I already use SPF and DKIM?
Yeah, great question. So DMARC exists because companies adopted SPF and DKIM but found they were still being spoofed. So neither SPF or DKIM authenticate the actual visible header from domain we all see in our email clients. So SPF and DKIM both authenticate values in the header that the end user never sees unless they open a header. So yeah, the DMARC's reasons for existence is a bunch of folks got together and discussed, hey, we adopted SPF and DKIM, but it hasn't stopped the tide of spoofing and phishing. So DMARC is the only authentication solution that actually authenticates the visible from domain in your header, and it's the only solution where you can actually set a policy to tell the rest of the world what to do with mail that spoofs you but doesn't pass authentication. So yes, absolutely. DMARC is going to become table stakes for a few things. One is getting your legitimate email delivered. So both Office 365 and Gmail now throw user warnings if a message is received that does not authenticate correctly. So, the big mailbox providers are encouraging companies to adopt DMARC at enforcement. If you do, you're going to see a few benefits. Number one is you're going to block the spoofing messages. But number two is you're going to give your legitimate mail the best chance of delivery possible. So I worked on the original DMARC implementation for HMRC, and HMRC, of course, was a heavily phished, brand, if you will, and their domains were heavily phished, and they had abysmal delivery rates of their legitimate mail because no one trusted mail from their domain. What they found is once they got to DMARC enforcement, they started blocking the spoofing messages, but their legitimate mail had an amazing increase in delivery. It was somewhere in the neighborhood of 70% because they had such poor delivery rates to begin with. Most of the customers we work with will see about a 5 to 10% increase in delivery once they adopt DMARC at enforcement. So it's a really important thing for the rest of the organization. Starting the DMARC journey, yes, of course, we're going to block malicious mail that spoofs our domain, but we're also going to give our legitimate mail the best chance of delivery possible. So that's important to areas outside of, IT and security as well.
Thank you, Brian. We've got a couple more questions here. One says, can you set up DMARC in Exchange 365 or Azure for our domain without the need of Valimail?
Sure. So anybody can put a DMARC record in place for their domain, and it sits in DNS. So there's no, there's no MX record change involved. There's no, frankly, it's outside of any sort of email gateway you use. So yes, any organization can use DMARC today. If you go to dmarc.org, there are some resources there on how you can do DMARC on your own. Certainly, a lot of the people we work with they test DMARC, they put a record in place, they receive the reports internally, and just to see what the data looks like, what is this whole process, and what a lot of the folks we work with run into is it's great to get the reporting and visibility, but I have to parse through these reports manually, and I have to make sense of them on my own, and you really need a service to interpret the reports for you. I've never seen an organization of any great size who's really gotten to DMARC enforcement, on their own. I showed those stats earlier across all domains we've ever scanned. Only about 20% of folks that do DMARC on their own ever get to enforcement, and percentage is much smaller with larger enterprises, but absolutely you can put a DMARC record in place. It's free. You can get the reports and see you know, what the data looks like, and then decide for yourselves if it makes sense to use the service.
Brilliant, thank you. Another question here, what makes this product unique and stand out in comparison to other products on the market?
It is two things. It's the automation piece, so automating all the senders who are, all the third-party cloud senders sending mail as you, as well as any services running on top of services. Then the hosted authentication piece, hosting your SPF, DKIM, and DMARC records for you. We're the only fully automated solution like this in the market. We were the first to do it. We've patented a lot of this technology, so it can't be copied, but allowing you to make authentication changes from a user interface with one click rather than doing manual DNS updates, that is unique. And then finally, getting customers to DMARC enforcement. So we have the highest enforcement rate out of any provider in this space. So if you start this DMARC journey, your goal should be to get to DMARC enforcement where your domain is actually protected. Otherwise, you're just getting reports and visibility, but people can still spoof you during that time. So a lot of folks, you know, think, well, I put a DMARC record in place, I'm getting the reports, I'm protected. That's not the case until you get to a DMARC enforcement posture where your DMARC policy is quarantine or reject. That's what we excel at. That's what we get customers to that posture within 4 months or less. And that really is what you should be interested in if you want to use a service for DMARC, is getting your domain to enforcement quickly, safely, and with a minimum of time and resource on your side.
Brilliant, thank you, Brian. So it looks like that's all the questions that we have today. So thank you everyone for submitting those. So if you do have any questions, any more questions, we do have our email address there if you'd like to submit them outside of the webinar. But thank you everyone for joining the webinar today. I hope you found it valuable, and thank you so much, Brian, for getting up so early in the US and presenting for us. As mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we will send you all a link to the recording. I'll probably send that this afternoon, and any of the links that Brian mentioned in his presentation, I'll pop those in there for you as well. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Cheers, everybody. Bye-bye.